Hey everybody, it is time to take another trip around the world. We're going to start here with my goldfish koi pond, although it does have a lot more than just goldfish and koi in there. I've got some platies, I've got some mollies, I've got some guppies you can see swimming around on the surface, and I have 6 neon rosy barbs, which are actually really hard to tell the difference between them and the goldfish. If you just saw this one here swimming around a little faster than the other ones, that's one of the rosy barbs, and again, very difficult to tell between them and the goldfish. You can tell the goldfish are waiting to be fed. If we walk down to this end of the tank, all of the goldfish will probably follow me down here if I stop banging into their tank and scaring them. But they will usually migrate down to whatever end of the tank I'm standing at and huddle around in front of me. And of course they're not going to do it this morning because I'm trying to get that on video. So not a lot to talk about in the pond. I do want to tinker with my filter a little more. It's not really coming out on video, but I can tell that the water has a lot of detritus and stuff swirling around in it. It's not cloudy in the sense that there's some sort of bacterial bloom or anything like that, but it is a lot of detritus getting swirled up, especially during feeding time when the goldfish and the koi get down in the bottom and start rooting around between the rocks and everything. It stirs up a lot of stuff. And so I think it's about time to change the filter in this tank. I do have a filter in here. You can just about make it out. This little round thing right there is a container where the water is drawn through. I have a hose that runs all the way down and around, and then the outflow of the hose is right here, and it's basically pointing towards the intake. So it's ideally it should blow stuff towards the end where it's going to get taken out of the tank. So other than that, not a whole lot to talk about with this one. I have been putting some iron supplements to get some red back in my red tiger lotus down here. It's working. It is more red, but it is also very, very much more compact, and it's not really sending any new growth up to the surface. So we'll have to wait and see how long it takes us before we have some pads floating on the surface again, but I have no doubt we'll have them soon enough. And I believe in the last video I shot, that bract, which I think it's easier just to call it a flower, but technically that is a bract. And that was just starting to open last time we shot a video, and now it is fully open. We also have a, well, we'll get to that when we get to it. I got a tiger lotus that's about to open up in my other tank, and I don't know if it's actually opened yet this morning. So again, not a lot going on with the tank, or the pond rather, but there you go. You can have brief look at it this morning. I'm going to go ahead and turn this light off just so it doesn't glare so much on the rest of the video. So we'll come over here. We'll get to my 29 miscellaneous. This one, as usual, nothing really going on in here. I did do a water change not long ago. I changed the filter, and so for once we're actually able to see this tank without the water flowing back through that emergency center section. We're actually still got good filter flow. Got the glass wiped down. Don't really need to do that very often in this tank because it just doesn't get really grungy. I don't have a lot of light in this tank. And that's about it. This one just ticks over like a clock. My angelfish up here that's always difficult to spot is a female, and she lays eggs fairly often. Nothing ever becomes of them, of course, because she's in there by herself, but she does lay eggs in there fairly often, so apparently she's a fairly happy fish. And again, everybody else in the tank is just ticking over like a clock. You can see this is some new growth here on my Nubius. I got that nice bright green leaf on that, and at some point I guess I will have to get in there and trim up that Java fern, but this tank is about a once a year trimming. Again, because it's such little light, none of that stuff grows very fast, whereas my other tanks are so brightly lit, I do get some fairly vigorous growth in a lot of my tanks. It's a little better look at that angelfish, which I think is one of the more beautiful angelfish I've had over the years. I just absolutely love the markings on this one. So there you go. That's what's going on with the 29. My gourami tank actually looks pin sharp today. Well, the glass looks pin sharp and the water looks pin sharp, but of course once you get in there and you start really looking at the vegetation, you can see that it's got a lot of cyanobacteria growing on it, and it looks pretty gross and grungy when we get up close to it. I meant to do a chemi-clean treatment on this tank last night. I got in there during my Sunday night live stream and cleaned up the glass. We did a really big water change, so again the water's nice and sparkly clear, and the glass is all wiped down nice and clean, but I never did go back and do a chemi-clean treatment. But you can see how much of it is actually just growing on the Java moss and everywhere else. So the fish are doing fine. I haven't lost anybody in this tank. Even my weird looking gourami back there that has those weird spots and stuff on it, I honestly believe that is some sort of form of vitiligo, or whatever the fish equivalent would be. Has just some weird disease that has to do with its coloration, but it doesn't seem to be in any distress. Nothing's changed. None of the other fish have started getting those weird markings on them, and so I think it's just something genetic with that one pearl gourami I have, and all the rest of them just seem to be fine and beautiful. Absolutely love my pearl gouramis. You can see that one back there is a big male. It's got that long dorsal fin, has the long trailing anal fin. You can see those sort of fibers that trail. There's another one right there. You can see that long dorsal fin and see those sort of fibers that trail. And there's another male. I have 3 males in this tank. And let's see. So we can see those are male. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I've got 4 males in this tank, because that one is certainly male. That looks like the big dominant male right there. And then that is most definitely a female. You can see the little rounded dorsal fin, and there's no real trailers behind the anal fin. And likewise with this one down here, if it ever turns sideways, you'll see that it doesn't have much in the way of a dorsal fin. It's just sort of round and stumpy, and then it doesn't have those trailers on the anal fin, and so that also is a female with bad eyes. I don't know what's up with this fish's eyes, but they've been like that since I got it. So again, not anything I'm going to worry about medicating or treating or whatever. That fish just has some weird eyes. It seems to be able to see just fine. I've never had it have any issues. It doesn't swim into walls. It can spot and, you know, gobble up its food just as easily as everybody else. So even though those eyes look kind of funky, it apparently still can see. So no worries there. So that's about it for this tank. Got it nice and cleaned up. We're going to have to do a filter change at some point, but that's not going to be today, and I'm probably not even going to bother doing a video about it. I'll just tell you someday that the filter's been changed, and that'll be the end of that. So I'm moving on to my 55-gallon tank. This is another one I got in here last night during our live stream, and we did a lot of maintenance on this one. We got the glass wiped down. I vacked out a bunch of crud and stuff off the bottom. We did probably an 80% water change. I took the water level way down low. And we have been treating this tank for cyanobacteria. I've been putting the chemi-clean in there. And so as we look through, we can now see a lot of the algae growing on everything. But we don't see any of that dark green cyanobacteria. See those marks on the side of the discus? They look like little white specks. That is from the day I put this discus in this tank. This discus was being bullied by the other discus in the discus tank. And I'd already lost one to bullying. And so before I lost this one, I pulled it out and I put it in this tank here. And I put it in here with the angelfish that we were just looking at in this gourami tank. That angelfish used to be in this tank, and it immediately began attacking that discus when I put that discus in here. And so you can still see it has markings on its side where it was pecked and banged. It knocked scales off and left scars on the side of it. So I quickly separated that angelfish out and had this discus in here singularly, and it's thriving. It's doing really well. I'm reluctant to put any larger fish back in the tank. I kind of want that discus to be in here by itself, but I am probably going to work on building this school up. I have the Buenos Aires tetras, and then I have 2 lonely diamond tetras, and so I'd like to sort of restock my school of diamonds and get that built back up, because the diamond tetras are absolutely amazing. Love them. So did the big water change, got the glass wiped down, didn't do anything with the filter, as I just said. I do have somebody that wants some water Sprite, so I will be getting in here later today or tomorrow and separating out a bunch of the baby water Sprite from that, and that will get sent off. I do sell my plants, so if you're interested in any aquatic plants, you can email me. My email is down below, and we'll talk about it. So my 40 breeder here, this was one that we were doing an experiment with. I put some otosynchus in here, and we were going to see how quickly the otosynchus got the tank all nice and cleaned up, and it seemed like they were doing a good job of it. But for one, I've been leaving that light turned out, as you just saw, because it's a really, really intense light. This is actually a grow light. This is not meant for aquarium use. This is meant for growing serious plants. And I'm trying it out over my fish tank, and it's just too much light. I'm going to have to do something about it. In the meantime, I can leave this tank turned off because there's nothing in it. I did put those otos in there, but last night I found one dead, and it was the only one I could even find in the tank. So as far as I know, there are no more otosynchus in this tank. I do have several nearite snails, and somewhere in there is one rubber lip pleco. So with the combination of the lights turned out, to prevent new growth from coming in on all this algae and everything, with the addition of the pleco and the snails, we're actually starting to get a little bit of improvement on this tank. It's really starting to look nice and get cleaned up. If you haven't been following along, pretty much everything you can see, like all those nice clean rocks and all that woodwork and all the green on all these plants and everything, all of that looked worse than this when it comes to having like algae and stuff growing all over it. This actually looks pretty good compared to the way this used to look, and now look at it. And so that is just a combination of turning the light out and letting some of those algae eating fish do their thing. So maybe we'll throw some guppies or something in here in the meantime, just to get some more algae eaters in there. But this tank is kind of just on hold right now. Nothing really going on in there other than kind of sort of experimenting with these algae eating fish and turning the lights out and everything. So we'll go ahead and leave that light out. We will move on to my other 125 Darryl. This is my New World tank. I do have other fish in there that are not New World fish, but that's okay. Most of the fish in here are New World, and I'm not a stickler for biotopes and all that sort of thing, so calling it the New World tank is just fine with me. Doesn't seem a lot of activity in there right now, but I do have plenty of fish. You can see I've got an angelfish right here. I have a spotted tilapia. This is one of my outsiders. That's a West African cichlid. So this whole end of the tank is her territory. You can see where she's cleared out all the gravel. She lays eggs down there a lot, and she gets a little fussy with anybody that comes down to her end of the tank. Strangely, she doesn't seem to mind the angelfish being in there. And I have a big pleco somewhere that is probably at the moment hiding under this log, but the pleco goes down to this end of the tank too. And then my spotted tilapia back there always has a bunch of stress with the pleco being at this end of the tank, which is wild. Red-tailed shark is another one that is not a New World fish. And then we get down to this end of the tank, and we can see my silver dollars. I've got some shiners in there. I've got a white suckerfish that I caught myself. That's still in there. Those are all native fish. I used to have or North American fish, rather. I used to have a sunfish in there that I caught myself, so that was another North American fish. So most of the fish in this tank are either North or South or Central American. Again, the New World stuff. Around the top of the tank, we have a bunch of little gambusia swimming around. They're a little harder to spot because they hide in the leaves and everything, but gambusia are also known as mosquito fish, and they're very closely related to guppies. And they look very similar to guppies if you didn't get a chance to actually see any of these little mosquito fish swimming around up there. Did a big, no, I did not do a big water change on this tank. I did a big water change on this tank last week. I'm going to get my weeks straight. They all start to run together. So we didn't do anything on this tank over the weekend. and it's still looking pretty good. I haven't even gotten in there and wiped the glass down in a little while, and it still looks pretty good. And if you're wondering where that piece of wood ends, it goes up to about right there and stops. And then this piece here on the corner is part of the same piece. This piece here is just a small tree that I just threw across the top along with this one. Sort of breaks up those lines and softens the edges. I don't like these real hard plastic, you know, corners, and so that sort of softens those lines by having the plants and the woodwork and everything sitting up there. So that is a look at my 125. And of course, if you want to see these tanks active, then you can join me for my live streams I do every Friday night and Sunday night at 8 p.m. We get in, we do tank maintenance, we do tank feedings, we sit, we chat, hang out. It's just a good time hanging out in the fish room on a Friday night or a Sunday night. And during that time, you will definitely get to see the fish getting fed and being more active and swimming around, and it won't look like this big sort of open, empty tank. As I explain to everybody on a regular basis, my tanks often look like this. Most people, as a rule, see it when I'm feeding them or see it when I'm shooting videos, and the tanks are usually quite busy, but I always try to convince everybody that that's not what I see most of the time. What I see most of the time is very chill tanks without a lot going on with them. A not very chill tank with plenty going on it is I think of this as my ham tank. And I call it my ham tank because look at these fish. Every time I come near it, they ham it up. They start doing cartwheels and headstands and doing loop-de-loops and swimming around because they think they're going to get some food out of me. And so I just refer to this as my ham tank, even though technically it's my fancy goldfish tank. So we got the 4 fancies in there. They're all doing really well. I got no issues. I got a recent addition to the tank, which is that deer's mandible or jawbone. You can see this here. That is a femur from a deer. It's just been in there a little longer, and so now I have the jawbone from a deer. And one of these days, if I can find a beware of the fish sign or killer fish or something like that, I'm going to put a sign in there and just go with the sort of silly theme like they're killer goldfish, and you know, any animals that get in that tank get devoured and their bones are scattered around the bottom of the tank, which I just think personally is funny because they're goldfish. Probably the least harmful fish in the world. Well, maybe not from an ecological point of view, but certainly from an aggression point of view. You don't have a whole lot to worry about with the goldfish. So having the sort of killer fish theme, I think, is kind of funny. Anyway, that's it. Not a lot going on with the goldfish tank. I have one of those lights over this tank as well. Another one of these huge grow lights. This tank, however, does have the goldfish in it, and I got a bunch of nearite snails in there, and they do a pretty good job of keeping the algae down. The glass gets torn up. I mean, the glass just gets covered with algae in a matter of days. I got in there 2 days ago and cleaned it all down, and that's why it still looks the way it does, but that gets green really quickly. My snail tank is still sitting there. I got the light turned out. In fact, I probably ought to start turning that light on more. I've got a living filter in this tank made out of Java moss, and apparently that Java moss is still getting enough light somehow that it's still doing fine. I guess the light's coming in from the tank on the side there, but I keep that light turned out because I have green water in this tank, or it turns green after that light's been on for a little while. So let's go ahead and leave it on, and probably the next round the world update I do, you'll be seeing me complain about having green water in this tank again. All I do is breed snails in it, so I don't really care. It doesn't need to be lighted. Now we get to my discus tank. Not too long ago I got in here and did a lot of work removing all of that water sprite. Let me turn this light out so you got a little less glare from me on the tank. So I got in there and I thinned out all of that. I think I just called that water sprite red tiger lotus. And we're already getting some really good new growth of it. Hey, look at that. We do have a flower. So yeah, I got a lotus flower blooming. And this also is a red tiger lotus, but I don't put iron supplements in this tank. And now you can see the difference. Look how green all of these pads look. You can see some red in them, but a lot of them are just completely green. This is not multiple species. This is all red tiger lotus. And yet, look at those pads back there. Not a lick of red on them anywhere. So I probably need to do a little bit of an iron supplement on this tank. We need to get in there and do some work. We're probably going to do that this coming Friday on my live stream. I unfortunately introduced duckweed to the tank. And so now my poor fern here has to deal with this. And I'm going to really need to do something about getting in here and cleaning some of this duckweed out of here, because that's going to really hinder the growth of my java there. Not to mention, I don't like the way it looks in this tank. So let me dispose of that java moss. That duckweed. I threw a handful of duckweed, like handfuls of duckweed in there last night that we got out of my gourami tank, and you can see it's all gone this morning. So if you've got duckweed and you got goldfish, well, you just shouldn't have duckweed if you have goldfish. I've actually considered putting a goldfish in this tank just to gobble up all of that duckweed, because I have it down here, it's floating all around, and I did not intend to have duckweed in this tank. It just sort of got in here, probably during a water change. I pull the hose out of one tank and throw it in the next, and if there's a single piece of duckweed stuck to it, I now have it in my new tank, you know. So fish-wise, not much going on in here. Everybody's still doing well. I've got the discus. We lost the one, as I explained earlier, due to bullying. The second one that was bullying, or getting bullied, is now in the 55 that we just saw earlier. And the remaining 8 seem to get along just fine. I don't have a whole lot of problems with them. You can see one here. There's another one that's really hard to spot, but it's hiding down there. And they will often spread out throughout the tank, and we'll see them down in the tiger lotus. And they don't clump together as much like a schooling fish as I would think. I don't know why. They're cichlids. And like, there's no other cichlid that I purchased that I feel like needs to be in a group or a school. And yet with the discus, for some reason, I felt like I needed to have a bunch of them in there, and that they do better in larger groups. There's my tenopoma making a brief appearance. So these seem to be doing well enough in the group of 8 that is now in here. But again, we lost one due to bullying. It bullied so bad it died before I figured out what was going on. I legitimately thought the fish had some sort of disease and was treating it with medication, and I did not realize the fish was simply being bullied and stressed, and that's what was killing it. And unfortunately, by the time I got it out of the tank, it was too late. It did die shortly thereafter in a quarantine tank. And then not long after that, the same thing started happening to another one of my discus, and this time I was able to figure out that it was not an illness, but it was bullying. And again, I removed the fish and everything has been just fine. So that is a little history of what's been going on in this tank, and why I only have 8 discus instead of the 10 that I originally had in this tank. And that's about it, really. Not a lot more going on. This tank is due for some maintenance. It's been a while. We'll save that for this Friday again, for Friday night's live stream. We'll get in here. We'll test the nitrate. I keep insisting to people that nitrate does not harm your fish. And this is the perfect example. I have discus in here that are quite happily living in 60 or 80 parts per million nitrate. And we've had no issues with them in well over a year now. So there you go. But we'll look at that again on Friday night. So make sure you're tuned in for that live stream. 20-gallon tank used to have a German blue ram in it along with this angelfish, but this angelfish is getting a little bit bigger. This is my angelfish Frank Gorshin. I don't name most of my fish, but this one just looked like a Frank Gorshin. Some of you may get that reference. Most of you probably will not, but that's all right. So as Frank Gorshin started getting a little bit bigger here, he started bullying my German blue ram, and once again I didn't get it out of there fast enough. And I was actually even saying on video one day that soon I'm going to have to do something about this angelfish, because it's getting big and it's starting to bully my ram. And when we came over to look at it, I found the ram was already dead, and so I was right. Unfortunately, I didn't act on it soon enough, and we lost my German blue ram. So we've got some mollies, some platies swimming around in this tank, or at least we used to. I don't know if they're still in there or not. But we got a couple of guppies, and then we've got a bunch of ember tetras. You can see those little redfish back there. Those are embers tetras. Oh, there we go. There's a little redwag platy that swam by. So I could have sworn we still had some platies in this tank. You can see them hiding behind the heater. There's a little head sticking out. That's a redwag platy. And I have a couple of nearite snails in the tank, and that's about it. So not a lot going on with this one. And there's another look at Frank Gorshin. Really, really good looking angelfish. Unfortunately, angelfish are dicks, and they will kill and beat up other fish on a regular basis. They'll beat up and kill each other. And the thing I hate most about angelfish, when you're trying to get video of them, you want to see their profile, not looking at them straight on. And whenever you're trying to get video of them, they look straight at you. And every time you turn the camera, they just keep looking at you, and it makes it really hard to get good video of them. So you'll notice all the blue in the fins there. That is really going to start to accentuate as this fish gets older and bigger. We're going to start to see a lot more of that blue coming through in those fins. Not really anything to talk about with the quarantine tank. I have a couple of resident platies that I just leave in there. Just keeps the tank up and running and cycled and, active with fish in it. I also have a couple of little clown plecos in there that are ready to go into their forever homes. I just haven't gotten them out of there yet, but not a lot going on in the quarantine tank. So last but certainly not least is my figure 8 puffers tank, Butterbean. He is a figure 8 puffer, as I mentioned, Tetraodon bioselatus. And his tank just got a lot of maintenance on it the other day too. I got in there with the with a siphon, and we siphoned a lot of the stuff off of the gravel. I don't get in there and do traditional gravel vac. I don't really do that in any of my tanks, where you scrunch down into the gravel and you get all the stuff up out of the inside of the gravel. I never do that because it disturbs the biologicals in the tank. It just disturbs the roots of any plants I've got in there, etc. So I never bother to do that. But I do remove all the crud and stuff that builds up on the surface. So we got a lot of that out of there. We got a lot of dead snail shells out of there. A lot of dead leaves off this Anubias that's really struggling. And I think all of the plants in here are really struggling because I've still been putting marine salts in the water, even though the water is not brackish. It doesn't meet the salinity requirements to call brackish, but it does have salt in it. It's got, enough salt in it that I think it makes it difficult for these plants to grow. I think it raises the pH in this tank. And once the pH gets up around 8, it's really difficult to grow plants anymore. And so when I did my big water change the other night, I took about 8 gallons out of it. It wasn't a huge water change, but it was a big enough water change that when I replaced the water, I only put fresh water back in. I didn't add any more salt. So we're going to start experiment with bringing the salinity down even further. And I'm going to try to get it into fresh water, and we're going to see how well Butterbean does. I kept Butterbean in salt water for years. And he did okay for a while, but he started developing these lesions on him. I kept him in high-end brackish, 1.008. And once he started developing those lesions, they just stayed there. He had these marks all over his body. And eventually, I started lowering the salinity. And as I got it down to where we are now, which, as I said, is below the level that would be considered brackish, but it does still have some salt in it. And at that, you can see he just looks fantastic. There's no more lesions. There's no more marks. He just looks great. So I'm tending to lean more towards this being more of a freshwater puffer than a brackish water puffer, which I had always believed early on. So we're going to continue the experiment, I think. We're going to try lowering the salinity a little more and get it down to just straight up fresh water with maybe just a little bit of added mineralization to it, and we're going to see if that doesn't help my plants. And then of course we're going to keep a close eye on Butterbean to make sure he's okay and it doesn't bother him. So that's about all I've got going on. We can wrap this up neatly at a nice even half hour. That'll be your round the world update for today. and we've come all the way back full circle to where we started. So thanks for watching. Don't forget about my live streams every Friday night, Sunday night. The easiest way to do that is just make sure you're subscribed and ring that bell, and then that way when I post my notifications for my live streams, you'll get the notification and you won't miss anything. I do, on rare occasions, do spur of the moment live streams, and again, having that notification bell rung, you won't miss any of those either. So I hope you enjoyed your little trip around the world with me this morning. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you real soon on the next one.